You're listening to the second season of the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on Genesis. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders, and I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner, and he is going to give us the Hebrew word of the day.
And Tyler and I were talking about this. It actually fits really well what we want to talk about today. It's Mabul, means flood.
Flood.
Yeah.
That's what we're on today.
Now, what I wanted to show you this, Genesis 6:17 is where I first found it. Mm-hmm. And behold, even I am bringing a flood of water on the earth. Notice that "of" is in brackets because it's not there in the actual English or Hebrew text. Yeah. Have you ever heard of a gloss? Do you know what a gloss is?
Yeah, I think so. Like in the Hebrew text, basically, right?
Okay.
Where they combine kind of words into like a shorter?
Oh, no. This one is going to be where it actually explains what the word is.
Oh.
And if you look at the Hebrew, it actually says, I am going to bring the flood, water upon the earth. So it looks like that
like
phrase,
water.
Yeah.
It's describing it.
Yeah,
that's defining it.
That phrase, water upon the earth, I think is describing it. And that's what's usually called a gloss.
Okay.
And I think that's probably what that is. Because think about it. They've never had rain before, so they wouldn't know what a flood was probably. Yeah. So it's kind of neat that it actually has to explain it right in the biblical text.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. He's going to destroy all flesh, which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish. So this is something that, I wanted to, let's first look at the word. It occurs 13 times in the Old Testament, 9 in this passage, in like
the narrative of the flood.
Yeah. So it's actually kind of interesting. Most of the time it's here. And then all the rest of them are just referring back to the flood.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So what I wanted to show you is that it looks like the world's already destroyed. And so when God brings the flood of water, it's already these guys are so corrupt that it sounds like the earth is already destroyed. So I wanted to show that. Verse 5 says, this is in chapter 6, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And remember when we saw that, we talked about this before, and it sounds like that's just like, in Hebrew, that's like heaping these phrases up to show just how bad it is.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Then the Lord was sorry he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And then we drop down to 11. Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come up before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Isn't that amazing? It just, in my mind, it already sounds like it's already destroyed, and now God's just going to finish the job.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought, when I first saw that, I thought, wow, that really is amazing what God told us about how corrupt it was, and then he's going to destroy it.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was interesting.
That is interesting.
Okay. So we're in the section. Remember one time we talked about the structure and the Toledoth pattern?
Oh, yeah.
This one now, we're in the history of Noah. So it's not even the history of the flood. It's actually the history of a person.
Yeah.
And which makes sense because the book is about God's relationship to people.
Yeah.
All right, verse 8. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah is a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God, and Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So basically, it is telling us that this is the generations of it, and then he's got to tell us about Shem, Ham, and Japheth because they'll be in the story. So it kind of helps us know who's there.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, first of all, it tells about the purpose for the flood. Oh, actually, it doesn't actually say the purpose. He just says he's going to wipe out all mankind and all of that. But the purpose must be to punish sin and to give righteousness a new start.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is if the purpose of the flood was to wipe out sin, it didn't work. Right? Because sin comes right back after it's over. So my guess is that's not the purpose of it. The purpose was to curtail sin enough so that righteousness has a new start and a better start.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's at least what I think it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Look at the size of the ark. So it's 450 feet long, 75 feet wide and 45 feet high, which that'd be
That's
really
big.
big. Yeah. The Mayflower was only 90 feet long. So that
Right.
gives you in contrast how big it is. The Ark was equal to in space to about 569 modern stock cars.
Okay.
That's, if you think about it, that's a lot of stock cars.
Yeah, that would be a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, I wanted to tell you about this.
Okay.
This is it's called it's a DVD and it's called The World That Perished.
Yeah.
Now it's really old, so I'll tell you that right off the bat. But in the middle of it, there's a core of stuff that's really helpful, like telling you how big the Ark was. It's about the size of 20 modern basketball courts.
Yeah.
To give you some help.
Yeah.
And then it talks about if every animal is about the size of a sheep, because because you're going to have some really big ones and you're going to have some really small ones. So they did it about the size of a sheep, and that would only take up about 60%, or I think it's even less, 30%. And then all the food would, on top of that, would take up another. I don't remember, it's another 60% or something. So it actually gives you some proportions of saying whether this is even possible or
Interesting.
not.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it also talks about the Ark being in the shape, in the structure of a modern ship today. I think it's 3 by 5.
The proportions, kind of.
Yeah. And they say that that's the same ones that modern shipbuilders do today.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's real helpful to give that kind of information.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
The World That Perished.
Yeah. And actually, last time I used it, I went online and could get it right offline.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as long as you
accessible.
know the name, I think would be helpful.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Then another thing, it has 3 levels, and then there's this rim around the top to let air in. They called it a window around the top. And then it has, it calls them rooms, but the Hebrew word is actually the word for nests. So it's almost
that's
like,
fascinating.
yeah, little nests for all these people. And that would make sense because you're going to have pretty wild animals in here.
Yeah.
So you need them in their own space to keep them away from the rest of them.
Yeah.
So I thought that was helpful. And then there's a pair of every unclean animals, and then 7 pairs of every clean animals. And some people have argued, that's because 2 stories were put together. And I'm going, I just think God's logical. He knew that if Noah was going to offer some sacrifices at the end, and you only got 1 pair of these animals, they're gone.
So
Yeah.
take a step back. What does that mean? 2 stories were combined. That like there was a.
Yeah. Some people have argued for like a JEDP source theory.
Yeah.
So they've argued that it came from 2 different sources.
Yeah.
Which I don't think it makes much sense.
That one source was saying there was a pair of every animal,
and then
another
another
one that was like kind of made that distinction
7
between
pairs of each. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It seems like to me that's not as logical, just knowing that God understood what was going to take place.
Yeah.
All right. I put down here the world that perished so that you guys would remember that's where the video is. Okay. So that gives us some idea about the Ark.
Yeah, the scale.
Yeah. The literary structure is actually really interesting too.
Ooh, I see brackets.
Yeah. But look here. In fact, I was going to put brackets all the way through there, but I thought if I do that, you won't see the clear ones in the middle. But it starts off with a transitional introduction. It ends with a transitional conclusion. Then there's 2 divine speeches before it and 2 divine speeches after it.
Okay.
But right in the heart of it, you've got that God remembers Noah in chapter 8, verse 1.
Yeah.
And then, so you've got the flood rising up, before it, then the water's going down. And so it looks like to me that there was a clear structure for this.
Yeah.
There's 2 people that had a debate on this going. One was a guy named Gordon Wenham, and Gordon Wenham argued. He said, "Look at the brilliant structure here." And John Emerton responded and said, "Well, what else did you expect? It's a flood.
This is what
the
happened.
water goes up, the
and it
water
goes
comes down."
Yeah.
But I think if you look at this, it does have a lot more structure than just a flood going up and down.
Yeah.
It talks about the waters rising for 150 days, them receding for 150 days.
Yeah.
And then right in the heart of it is
So some
God
of the
remembers.
details make that connection.
Yeah. So I think it's more than just the water goes up and the water comes down.
Yeah.
So I think this is real helpful to see, though.
And what do you call this type of structure?
Well, I call it a palistro.
Yeah, that's what I was waiting for.
and as you can see, they balance against each
Yeah.
other, and the important thing is right in the middle.
Yeah,
And so
that's what it's
helping it.
doing, basically, is it's highlighting the most important piece.
Yeah. So, okay, you got it. And then it's interesting. The dates of the flood are all within Noah's life. This was a common way to do things back at that time, like king lists. Well, sometimes the Babylonian king list will sometimes have the king and then the which day it was in his reign, and then
Okay.
what very important thing that happened during that time.
Yeah.
And so you'll have those in there. What I think is interesting here is, had they not done it that way, I don't know what they would have linked it to, right? Because there's no major kingdoms, empires at this time.
Yeah.
There's nothing like that. So you wouldn't be able to do this. But if he links it with Noah's life, then you know how long the flood was, at least.
Yeah.
So we've got it a year and 11 days, basically. Yeah. So I think that was helpful.
Yeah, that is, yeah. Interesting.
All right, now we're into the debated part.
Yeah.
Is it a local flood or is it a universal
Well,
flood?
can you tell me a little bit of the stakes
Yeah.
behind this? Like, why is this such an important distinction to make?
A couple things that I think are real crucial. He says that this flood is not going to be like any other flood that they've had, because and we've had some huge local floods.
Yeah.
And so he's saying this one is going to be more than any of them.
Yeah.
And a couple things that I think are interesting is that each of the continents have what looks like indications of water covering them. Like you'll see crustaceans and some kind of shells on almost every, even in Antarctica, there's some.
Yeah.
So the question is,
Where you wouldn't expect to find it.
yeah, if it's a local flood, why would you have that everywhere like that? So now, I don't think there's going to be a theological problem with either of them, as long as the one thing that has to happen is all the air breathing animals and men have to die.
Yeah.
Now, and birds and things like that. Now, birds can migrate a long way. So if it's a local one, it would seem unlikely that bird could not fly out of it.
Yeah.
And it would seem like to me, if it's a local one, why didn't God, rather than having the ark built, why didn't he just move all the people?
Oh, sure. Out of the...
Been so much easier, it would have seemed like.
Yeah.
So it just seems like the evidence suggests this kind of thing. But there are problems with each of the views, and I do want to point out those.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about it.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about a universal flood first. This is the one I hold because I actually think there's enough evidence around the whole globe that would not be possible otherwise. But the universal language suggests a universal flood. Like it always says, all the mountains were covered, even all the high ones, stuff like that. And because water tends to flow, it tends to seep to the lowest level, you would think it would just, even if it was a tidal wave, let's say, that wiped out people, you would think that in time that would just
Recede
go back to normal. Yeah. So all the land is used in Genesis 1:29 and in 11:9, suggesting a universal sense. The amount of time suggests a universal flood. It's
so long.
A year and 11 days is a long time. All living beings that breathe air had to be destroyed, and it would seem like they could just move to other places if it was local. And I put on there, water tends to level out. It could be difficult to confine to a certain part of the earth. What I did want to show you is if it might be possible that both of these could be right. And the reason I say that is right now they believe that the earth was put together in what's called a Pangea, where all
the continents were basically connected.
Yeah. And even today, we know they're moving at about an inch a year apart from each other. So they're floating to some extent. So I think it might be possible to cover this area here and still have other places that weren't. Let me see if I can find it. See, in my mind, tides are kind of like that. A tide, like the moon will pull the water. Oh, what I didn't realize is that there's a high tide on both sides. I always thought that the moon, when it pulled it, it actually made it so it was wherever the moon was. But apparently on the opposite side of the earth,
it also gets high tide.
And then low tide on the places where it's away from the moon, the moon here. So I thought, if you had the Pangea in the right spot and the Earth was tipped just right, you could actually have that whole Pangea covered, and then maybe the rest of it would be more like low tide and have not as much water.
Interesting.
So I guess it is possible, at least, that could do it. And if it's a Pangea, it covers it all. But think about it. It's not just a daytime. It would have to be for a whole year that was covered.
Right.
Which seems less likely to me. So that's that Pangea. And I think that's actually helpful to know. And we do know that it's still
there's still
moving.
movement.
Yeah. The problems. What would happen to all the water?
Yeah.
Actually, this actually is really good there.
The DVD.
Yeah, because it actually says that in one spot in our oceans, it's 7 miles deep, and that's a lot of water that would be. And I think I can't remember exactly, but it's like 3/4 of our world is still
something like that,
mostly water. And then if you think about the global ice caps, water as it freezes goes up, so it could just continue to freeze and be up higher, and so that could be where a good share of the water is stored too. So and they found dinosaurs or things like that up in those global ice caps too.
Yeah.
So it does make sense that we have something like that anyway.
Interesting.
And another thing that this DVD points out is that if there was some kind of a vapor canopy or something like that burst during the flood, so that all that water would come down, that could also hold the temperatures more even. So that is a possibility of what could have happened there too.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So all of these things are at least plausible, at least.
Okay.
Yeah. The one thing that is still a problem with a universal flood is, would the Earth's crust be able to bear up under all that weight?
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, the Earth's crust is actually quite fragile. It's only, I think it's only 2 miles thick.
Yeah.
But compared to the rest of the Earth, that's really not much.
It's like a thin shell kind of.
Yeah, that's what people have said. It's like an egg, and if you put too much pressure on that, it would burst the continents and stuff like that. Well, now partially that could have happened. At least some of that could have happened in the flood, where it's pushing these plates around and stuff like that.
Like that would be what happened with Pangea, essentially.
Yeah. It's partly why it's being broke up and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So at least there's things like that are possible to help you.
Now, does the timing work out for that?
Oh, what do you mean?
Like if we know that like continents are moving like an inch a year or whatever. Like how far back does that put their estimation of when Pangea would have been together? That'd be probably considerable.
Yeah, but I would probably say that's probably not a very good way to do it, because I'm assuming that at the flood they could have been moving faster than they are now.
Okay.
And now it's just kind of a settling process. So it could have been more then.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I was going to say about the Earth, it's also possible. Remember, it says that the water comes up from under the Earth too.
Oh, yeah.
So as that pressure gets on the outside, you'd have also water shooting up through it that's under the Earth. And then the minute it kind of equals out, then it wouldn't totally. So what could happen is help crack it, but then not totally smash it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a possibility.
Okay.
All right, now for a local flood.
Local flood.
All right. Sometimes the word all has restrictions. So
in Genesis.
Yeah, I've given some examples where all doesn't necessarily mean everything. So it's possible. It would be possible to kill all the air-breathing animals with a local flood if the continents were joined, like we had in that Pangea. So that might work. The gravitational pull of the moon may be able to create a wave that would then cover the continent, but it has to cover that continent for a whole year, and that would seem at least unusual for how we do it now, because we have double tides, and it'd seem unusual that you'd have it that long, unless you could tip the Earth to some extent and have it always. But it would still be rotating, I would think.
Yeah.
So I'm not convinced that would happen. Problems. A natural reading of the text suggests a universal flood.
Yeah.
And I think most people would agree with that,
Right.
when it talks about all the highest mountains and all that stuff. It's easier just to move animals than to build an ark. It's going to take
So
them a long time.
if it's a local flood, why not just?
Yeah. Now,
hoof it kind of
I
another
think
place.
there's a response to that too, because maybe God wanted to give those people a chance to repent. And so maybe building the ark was some way to say, okay, here's
This is the way, kind of.
yeah, and this is the possibilities. Do you want it? Do you want to repent or not? So it's possible there could be almost like a sign to them that this is what's coming, and God told us. So do you want to get out of it?
Yeah.
So it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. God promises there will never be another flood like this one. So that means it has to be bigger than any of them we've ever had before.
Yeah.
That one has to be true.
So it'd have to be the biggest local flood.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And then birds, again, can migrate long distances.
Yeah.
And we know that. They can fly from the places in Canada all the way down to Panama and in that area in migrations.
Yeah.
So we know that that's possible. So that's kind of our possibilities. And here's that idea of those tides helping gravitational pull.
Yeah.
This was actually really helpful because it gave a picture to explain what I often try to do on the board sometimes.
Yeah.
So, all right. So that's pretty much our things. Do you have any questions or things that you want to know about this?
I mean, I think it's I don't know if there's anything specific.
Okay.
I mean, there's always kind of questions I think that touch a lot of other
Yeah.
pieces. Like, I mean, maybe like a question would be like if we're looking at, kind of fossil records to see, sea life in places we don't expect it.
Yeah.
How do you kind of hold that in one hand while also kind of holding in, what that information seems to tell us about like the age of the Earth. So like, I guess there's some of those questions I have like about how do these things interact with each other?
Yeah. It would seem like to me, I'm going to show you a picture in a minute. Can I come back to that question in a minute?
Yeah.
Because what I want to do is I want to also say, I don't think this is a primary thing that we all have to agree on. I think it's very possible there's going to be good, solid Christians that hold both of these views.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a problem. And I think we ought to be able to get along with people that
Sure,
hold these other views.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like you said earlier, it's like you don't necessarily see a theological hang up with either one particularly.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure people know that because, there's going to be people that hold both views, and that's fine with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's go. I wanted to show you Grand Canyon because it seems, and I think almost everyone will say that most of the riverbeds that you see today, they're not holding the water they could contain. So the question is how did something like this get made that are so broad at the top and just got a little in the bottom? And even if that river was 10 times more, it's not going to create something this vast.
Right.
And the only way that I think this could be created is if it at one point was more malleable. I mean, because in the bottom there's solid rock that river is going over, and they're still there. It doesn't wear it all away really quick.
Yeah.
But these things are mammoth. How did we get this? And I think it has to be before those rocks hardened. You've got this sediment that then was being carried away that would then actually provide to give something like this.
So it would have moved faster than probably like maybe like a geologist or whatever would say like we would just have to take millions and millions of years.
Yeah.
But potentially if the rocks weren't super hard yet, it could have moved faster.
And also in about 3 or 4 years ago, I got to go down the Grand Canyon on a teaching tour about how it was created and stuff like that, and it was really helpful. There are actually folds in the rock too, where a rock will be totally bent over. I wish I had some pictures of them, but you'd wonder how would that be made if this was gradually, because if it's gradually, they're going to wear at a pretty constant rate, and you're not going to have these bends in the rock.
Yeah.
So how did those come about? And they argued it's because that at some point these were softer rocks that could be sediment that could then be bent and then hardened.
Yeah.
And so you've got these big bends in them.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And the interesting also thing is you can kind of see the sorting layers along there. So you can actually see how that, at least part of those were made. And some of these rock formations go all the way over to like Sedona, the red rocks. They can actually find that layer over in here too. And
wow.
this is like I don't know, 50 miles away.
Right.
So it's interesting that far away you still got these levels of red rock, and you can see where they are.
Yeah.
So one other thing that was really interesting when we went through there is you can get to there's a place where below it you don't have any fossils or anything like that. And I guess this is not the only place, but at least they actually showed us one where you go below a certain level and underneath there are not fossils and stuff like that, like what you'd expect.
Right.
If it's a gradual thing and it was just built up. Why is at a certain point are there no fossils and anything like that below it?
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I've got pictures of it somewhere, but I didn't bring those today. Sorry. I thought you should see this. This was a flood in Pakistan, and this was look at how much is affected from that flood, and so I thought, if the flood we're talking about is bigger than any one that we've ever had before, this was amazing because this whole area was affected by that flood, and I thought that would help you to see just how big they are.
Well, tell me a little bit about the damage we're seeing here.
Apparently, that's all water. And so that was where the water was when that flood came through. So this has to be several hundred miles because we're up in space looking at how much damage was done there.
Wow.
Yeah. So I thought that would be helpful for us to see.
Yeah.
And then this one's kind of a neat picture. This is it's called the Horseshoe Bend.
Oh yeah,
in
this is
Grand
very
Canyon.
famous.
Yeah. But again, that shows the different layers of the sediment that were laid down. Mm-hmm. And if it was a flood, they were laid down quite quickly.
In the chaos, essentially, or whatever.
Yeah. So I thought that would be helpful. Now, this one I thought was helpful also. This is in Arizona, and there's one place that is even better. I couldn't find it. But this was from a drone taking a picture of. This looks like water running off, and this is a desert now.
Yeah.
So it left these water runoff things.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's really helpful to see. Probably water from a flood could have torn through
kind of
these,
cut through.
Yeah, and made these. So I thought, that's helpful.
Yeah.
And then I thought this is another picture of the Grand Canyon. I just wanted you to see how vast it is.
Yeah.
This you can see it clear over in the at least
miles and miles.
Yeah,
and miles.
20 miles away at least you can actually still see these great gulches that are there.
Yeah, it's hard to. I've only been once, and I went to the North Rim, and it really was it's shocking.
It is.
It really is how the scale of it is unbelievable,
and how deep they are.
Yeah.
You know what my kids did? My kids went to the southern border of it. They looked over and said, "Is that all?"
That's it.
Yeah.
It's on the Northern Rim, it's like there's fewer people.
Yes.
And you can
see down further too.
You can see way down, and you can camp right next to. There's cabins like right there, and even that's a little bit. I mean, if you sleepwalk or something, you just feel like the edge is just right there, and it is so vast that even though it feels solid and everything, just when you get close to the edge, it is. It's so because it's just so deep.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the Grand Canyon, and it's helpful.
Yeah.
Following the flood, Noah built an altar, and offered a burnt offering to God. Mm-hmm. God promises never to send another flood like this one. Yep. So these are some of the things. God blesses Noah. Now he can eat animals, but other, because remember he couldn't eat animals before. It was pretty much vegetables, probably.
Yeah.
But he still, there's a restriction about no blood.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then command for capital punishment. That's in chapter 9. And then God offers the covenant and then the rainbow sign.
Yeah.
So that's then following the flood.
Yeah.
We talked about this before.
Uh-huh.
But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you how similar at least I picked Gilgamesh because it's got the best examples of it that are close to the biblical text.
Yeah, so we're just going to see other ancient Near East kind of flood narratives.
Here's the Gilgamesh epic. What I first wanted you to see is they think it's at least the part that we know because it goes through several. Like there's a Sumerian telling of it. There's Akkadian ones, and then even later like Assyrian records talking about it.
Of the flood or the whole Epic of Gilgamesh?
Yeah, the whole Epic of Gilgamesh.
Okay.
And so it goes from probably 1300 all the way back to about 2100 in the telling of the story.
Yeah.
I wanted you to see that because that's kind of what we've got in the biblical text, in that we've got stories that go back clear before Noah, right? I mean Moses. Moses in the 1400s. Well, these stories go back thousands of years maybe before him.
Yeah.
You know, Abraham is like, let's say 2000 BC.
All right.
Before that was stuff about the flood and things like that. So this could go back quite a bit more. So it would be a similar kind of thing, is that the story continues to be told and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I thought, that's actually interesting because it's very similar to what the biblical text does.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Itinushipin, or whatever his name is, says to Gilgamesh. Oh, what I wanted to do is I wanted you to see the actual wording of Gilgamesh and see how similar it is.
Okay.
I will reveal to thee, Gilgamesh, a hidden matter. When their heart led the great gods to produce the flood. Now, what I've done is I've skipped some stuff. If you see 3 dots, I've left some of the parts out because this is a huge story. I mean, in the book I was looking at, it probably goes for 50 pages.
Wow.
So what I tried to do is just pull out the stuff that would help us.
Yeah.
All right. And then he tells Gilgamesh to tear down this house and build a ship. Give up possessions, seek thou life, forswear worldly goods, and keep the soul alive. Aboard the ship, take thou the seed of all living things. I thought that was helpful.
Yeah.
And the ship thou shalt build, her dimensions will be to measure. Equal will be her width and her length, like the apsu, that means the heavens, shall be, thou shalt seal her. Now, they thought the heavens were hard, so they wanted a ceiling on it that was solid, too.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it helps us to understand what they're saying. On the 5th day, I laid their framework, and a whole acre was her floor space. Now, that's really big. An acre. Usually at that time, what they thought an acre was the amount of land that a pair of oxen could plow in a day. So an acre is a lot.
That'd be big, yeah.
I don't even think the biblical text, the ark, is that big.
Right.
So I think that's huge. And then it talks about 10 dozen cubits, the height of each of her walls, and it's a square deck. So I thought you could see that. The gods were frightened by the deluge. I thought that was interesting.
That they did. They made.
Yeah.
Wow.
They actually would say that one of the gods actually did it, but
and
it was
the others were frightened by it. Or something.
and it was kind of an agreement by all of them except the one that told Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Okay, 6 days and 6 nights blows the flood wind, and the south storm sweeps the land. Then the 7th day arrived, the flood-carrying south storm subsided in the battle. So it's got a 6-day flood, which it'd have to be local. It could not be, because for that water to go up and come down, the biblical text seems to be a lot more logical that it takes over a year than it does over a week, about a week. Now, notice it's out in Mount Nizar is where the ship came to rest instead of Mount Ararat. I thought that's interesting because in their minds, Mount Nizar was the mount they knew that was in the north.
Yeah.
So that was kind of their place, and so they kind of put the flood story in their understanding.
Yeah.
Okay, he sends out a dove, a swallow, a raven.
Oh, that's funny.
It's very similar to the biblical story. See, it's these similarities that suggest to me that there was an original story that these others took from and made it their own.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened to this Gilgamesh epic. There was a biblical story that actually happened.
And they kind of adapted it
to their own, their own culture and stuff. Yeah. And to their own logic. Remember the logic of the gods sending the flood because the people are too noisy.
Oh, they're too noisy, right. Yeah.
So it fits their logic, but it doesn't seem like it fits ours very well.
Yeah.
Okay. These are the similarities. Square, not seaworthy. The ark is very, very seaworthy. We know that. 6 days and 6 nights, not long enough to kill every living being, I wouldn't think. I don't think I could hold my breath for 6 days and 6 nights, but still, that it's going to kill everything on the earth seems like it would take more than that.
Yeah.
Flood is about a year, long enough to kill all living beings. Similar to the biblical account, he sends out a dove, a swallow, a raven, similar to the biblical story. So this is what I've said. Likely the ancient Near Eastern stories arose from the biblical story.
Yeah.
And that would make sense to me.
Yeah.
So I thought that was helpful.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think the Gilgamesh epic is 6 days and 6 nights.
Yeah.
Because that does seem similar to the creation
yeah.
narrative.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, that's kind of a, I mean, I guess it could also just be like a week. Maybe they're thinking in terms of a specific period of time, but.
It seems odd, though, that a flood could kill everything and do all that damage.
Yeah, the size or the, not epicness, but the scale of it or something.
Yeah. Okay, here's the conclusions.
Okay.
Mankind must have been really corrupt.
Yeah.
Remember, we started off with that the earth was already corrupt pretty much. So I thought that was actually helpful to remember. And that the flood would do serious damage to the earth. I mean, think of that, of the amount of water that it would take to flood even the highest mountains.
Yeah.
And then even the receding, how much damage that would do.
Yeah.
And maybe if there was a Pangea, that it even broke up the land masses. So it does make sense. The flood lasted a year and 11 days. I think that's helpful to remember in our minds.
Yeah.
It appears that the flood was universal, at least from what I can tell, that would be true. And I do that more from the amount of water and the that you see shells and stuff like that in places you never expect to.
Yeah.
Okay, so stuff like that. And then I think the key is that God started over again with Noah because the world was so corrupt.
Yeah.
So I think those are actually really important things that are helpful for us to remember.
Yeah. And that's important, I think, to remember, too. It's like what you said at the beginning is like, why does this happen?
Yeah.
It's not really to wipe out sin. Probably to punish sin, but not to like wipe it out.
Yeah.
But, a restart for righteousness. Can you
And
tell me a
then-
little more about that?
Yeah, because then what looks like happens, you've got almost a genealogy to get you down to, well, you do have the Tower of Babel, and that's before you get to Abraham.
Yeah.
But that Tower of Babel seems to, again, wickedness was coming back. There was no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But his idea about spreading them out so that they are no longer could be together and do the amazing things. In chapter 11, it is kind of amazing when it says that God actually says, I'm going to spread them out because there's nothing that these people cannot achieve if they stay together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty amazing statement where God says that would be for good, but it'd also be for bad.
Sure.
So
right.
imagine the wickedness they could do.
Yeah.
So by spreading them out, and today, I actually read something the other day that I can't remember, but there's been only about a couple hundred years that there haven't been major battles on the earth somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the amount of money that they spent on protection or what
Right.
battles cost is just astronomical. And imagine if God had not done that, what could have been here.
Well, I mean, one of my kind of big theories of the world and the feeling people have about it, because it does seem like people are very, frustrated and, depressed probably isn't quite the right word, but very down about the state of the world.
Sure.
And I think the assumption is that it's getting worse and worse and worse. And that may be true.
Yeah.
But I think part of it is just we have so much more exposure to it and knowledge of how horrific how many horrible things are happening at any given time. I mean, it's just, it's constantly on your phone. You know about it, and the corruption is so much more visible,
almost.
and like we experience it, and it can be very, it can be a real downer for sure. But I guess what's interesting about this though is like it seems like in Genesis we get a couple different ways that God addresses this.
Yeah.
And what is it all kind of leading to?
Yeah. So I was going to say that what's actually kind of helpful is to realize it's been really wicked in the past and God's take care of it. So I'm assuming that if it gets really wicked again, God can also deal with that and figure it out.
Yeah. Which I guess that does repeat a lot. We do see it often in the Bible.
Yeah.
not to plug the Isaiah podcast again, but we see it a lot there.
Yeah.
I mean, God is so frustrated. He's like, what else can I do? Like, the punishment I've doled out has been, complete, it seems like, but still, there's wickedness. So here's what's coming.
And the good news is the plan is he's going to still work it out.
Yeah.
So that's the good encouragement from us.
Right.
So,
well,
that's what I have for you today.
Okay, that's perfect. I think that was great.
Yeah.
The flood narrative.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what we'll do next, but I assume probably get into the Tower of Babel.
Do you want to answer that question I asked a little bit earlier?
Oh, what was
How
it?
you connect kind of the flood narrative.
Oh, yeah.
And then like age of creation, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think, they are connected into some sense, because this could be how you get what looks like a lot more time here. Because if there was a flood that laid down a bunch of sediment and stuff like that then had all these layers of fossils and stuff like that, it would then help people to say, oh, yeah, it looks like it's very, very old. So I can see how they work together.
Okay.
But in one sense, they're kind of separate stories, too, because the creation story gives rise to what can happen in the flood, but they're not so intricately connected that the flood necessarily had to happen.
I see.
Yeah. So, but I'm wondering if the flood helps us to get what look like evidence to confirm that there was really a flood on the earth.
Yeah.
And maybe God did that so that we'd actually have at least some evidence to suggest the things that the biblical text tells us are true.
Okay.
So maybe that's what it's for.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what did you have any ideas for our next topic?
Why don't we try the Tower of Babel?
Okay.
And see what that's doing and why it's there. And, and then probably get next Abraham.
All right. That sounds good to me.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.